Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to explore one of the most important and complicated periods in United States history, the Westward Expansion. We'll be asking big questions like why did people move west? What challenges did they face? And most importantly, what were the consequences of this movement? So, as we go through this lesson, remember, history is not just about events, right? It's about people, perspectives, and the impact those events had on real lives. Okay? It wasn't just one activity. It was a multitude of different things. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Miss Bree. I'm an educator, a farmer, an illustrator, a singer, and a proud grammar nerd. Welcome to the Farm School. So what was Westward Expansion? Well, the Westward Expansion refers to the movement of people from the eastern United States, where the colonies originated, all the way towards the lands in the West, okay? So this was after we had the Louisiana Purchase, after all of these things. Families started to pack up their belongings and traveled long distances, hoping to find land, build farms, and create better lives. This movement stretched all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Over time, it even changed the shape, economy, and identity of the entire nation. Now, manifest destiny was a powerful belief in the 1800s, okay? Many Americans believed that it was their right and even their duty to settle the western lands, to expand across the continent from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific, okay? However, this belief ignores the indigenous American peoples who had already lived on these lands for thousands of years. It was already settled. However, the European Americans, right, the people who came from Europe and had immigrated and all of that, thought that they were just savages, right, which wasn't very fair, right? It's not very kind. However, that was their thought process. So, because it ignored the fact that indigenous peoples had already lived on and cared for this land for thousands and thousands of years, understanding this manifest destiny helps us to see both sides, right? So it helps us to see the motivations behind expansion and also the harm that it caused, okay? So you can see where there was a lot of clashes. So, let's move on. So, land growth was a big one. Several major events made westward expansion possible, right? So first, we have the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. This doubled the size of the United States overnight, which is insane. Okay, this was huge. Then we have the Oregon Trail, which you might have heard of because it was very, very famous. It became a major route for settlers traveling west in search of farmland. And you have the Mexican-American War, which added even more land, like California and Texas. Okay, this added a bunch more land to the country. Together, these events transformed the United States into a nation that stretched from coast to coast. Now, you have to remember, traveling west was not easy, okay? Families faced extreme weather, illness, injury, dangerous terrain, and extremely limited supplies. Many people traveled for months and months in covered wagons, crossing rivers, mountains, and plains. This journey required strength, determination, and often great sacrifice. So, why would people take such risks, right? Why would you do it? Well, there were several opportunities, several reasons, right? The number one thing being land, right? The government offered free or inexpensive land to settlers, okay? They wanted people to settle the West. And so they basically said, well, we'll give you this amount of land so that you can have a farm and grow things and be prosperous if you go there. So that was number one. Number two, discoveries like the gold rush and farming opportunities. Number two is farming opportunities. Rich soil promised successful crops, okay? Open prairies. You didn't have to fight a bunch of trees, things like that. Then you had the gold rush, right? Gold and natural resources. That attracted thousands and thousands of people seeking fortune, right? Then you had fresh starts. Many just wanted to leave behind their difficult lives and troubled pasts. Okay? And for some, the West represented hope. Now, for others, it brought hardship and uncertainty. Once the settlers arrived, the real work began. They had to clear land, build homes, plant crops, and raise animals. Communities began to form, with towns, schools, and markets. Railroads were built, connecting regions and making travel and trade much faster. Life on the frontier required constant effort, resilience, and cooperation. Now, here's the thing. While westward expansion created opportunities for settlers, it had devastating effects on the indigenous peoples. The native communities were forced from their ancestral lands, relocated without asking, right? They were forced to go to reservations, and they completely were stripped of traditional ways of life. Treaties were often broken, leading to conflict and suffering, which is just unfair, right? That's not very kind either. If you make a promise, you should keep it, but a lot of them were not kept. So it's very important that we study and understand this part of history and remember it with honesty and respect. Okay? Now, the Transcontinental Railroad was another major turning point. It allowed people and goods to move across the country much faster than ever before. Towns grew along railroad lines, and trade expanded rapidly. The railroad helped to shape the modern United States. However, it also accelerated or quickened the displacement of indigenous communities. Right? Now, history looks very different depending on who you ask, okay? So you have the white settlers' perspective, okay? Westward expansion to them meant opportunity, land ownership, and building a better life for their families, right? Others faced mixed challenges and success on the frontier. You didn't know. However, for indigenous peoples, it meant the loss of their homeland, loss of their culture, and forced displacement, right? It meant they had to leave their homes, the only place they'd ever known. All of that. So, to truly understand history, we have to consider all the perspectives, okay? It's never just one perspective. So, then we have positive and negative effects, right? So, the positive effects of westward expansion included growth of the country. New farms and cities expanded, right? Trade, transportation, all of these things grew, right? Thriving farms, growing cities, railroad connections, all of these things were awesome. The negative effects included the displacement of our native peoples, right? Our native populations. Environmental damage, right? This land had been cared for and tended for eons by the native population, the indigenous people. And in a single generation, a lot of that was wiped out, and the environmental damage was enormous, you know? The conflict and inequality was huge. Okay, so forced relocations, the buffalo herds, right? The bison, the American bison, the loss of those was huge to the native peoples because they used those for food and shelter and tools and everything, right? All of these broken treaties were extremely harmful. So again, history is rarely simple, right? It includes both progress and harm. So, why does it matter today? Well, the effects of westward expansion are still with us today. Land ownership, cultural identity, and even current policies are shaped by this history. Understanding the past helps us make better decisions, respect different perspectives, and build a more informed future. So let's think critically. All right, so think like a historian. Number one, would you have moved west? Why or why not? What challenges would you have faced? How might different groups feel about expansion? Historians don't just learn facts, they ask questions and explore different perspectives. Their goal is to understand the whole, right? The sum of the parts rather than just individual pieces. Okay, so let's review what we've learned. People moved west for land, opportunity, and a fresh start. Life on the trail was difficult and required determination. Expansion created opportunity for some, but caused great harm to others. Westward expansion was truly a time of change, opportunity, and challenge. Now it's your turn to step into history, okay? I want you to map the Oregon Trail. Draw a pioneer wagon. You can write a diary entry from the perspective of a traveler. You can research a historical figure, or you could even create a timeline of key events. All these activities will help bring the history to life, and really, it's an amazingly interesting history, and it will be so amazing to learn about all the different things that happened during this migration period, okay? So I highly recommend you do these things. Plus, it's fun. So, thanks, guys, for learning with me today. Remember, history isn't just about the past. It helps us understand the present and shape the future. Okay? So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks, guys.